Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining today. As you're aware, this is a session on PPIE with Shahid Islam. So we're very excited for him to be here today for our Lunch and Learn. Shahid's going to talk today all about his wonderful work across the ARC. He's the lead for co-production for ARC now, so some of you may know him and his role. If you have any questions for Shahid, he will answer them at the end. I'll be monitoring the chat so we can come to you at the end, but please do put the questions as they pop up throughout the presentation and we'll make sure that we get to you at the end. Okay, I'm just checking. I think that is everybody. So I will now hand over to Shahid, who is going to share his presentation. It's just at the bottom there.
Right, thank you, Kaylee, for organising this, and for Divine and Kate and others. Thank you for people who've joined, for coming along. I'm Shahid Islam. I'm a Principal Research Fellow at the Bradford Institute for Health Research, working in Act Early and across the ARC. And I'm now also the Director for the Centre for Co-production and Peer Research. And I suppose I want to talk to you a little bit about our plans and our journey of developing a co-production strategy, how we went about doing that. You okay? Yeah. How we went about doing that, and where we've got to, and what the future looks like. So I suppose the first place to start is I've been working in the sort of paradigm, the field of community involvement and engagement and patient and public involvement quite a few years. And at the start of that journey, it wasn't always an easy thing to sell. It was always, okay, this is a useful thing, but we haven't got a massive amount of resource for it. It was almost seen as a little bit of a cherry on top of the cake. And since NIHR, Wellcome, and various other funders, including UKRI, have really mandated this as an important part of research. It's no longer just a cherry on top of the cake. It's actually the yeast which makes the cake rise in a way. And so everybody expects you as researchers and implementers to really have a robust plan about how you're going to involve members of the public in a non-tokenistic way, in a way which is effective, which is appropriate, which is inclusive, and meets all the requirements of equality and diversity. Somebody's trying to enter. Shall I just keep on admitting people? Would that be okay? No, it's okay. Stay here. I'll just admit people as they...
We're having IT issues, guys. We've got one room and our laptops are interfering, so apologies for the technical issues.
But if people can hear, then that's the main thing. So so that's music to my ears, that, you know, it's now no longer just something that we have to push for. It's actually really strongly mandated by a number of funding bodies and ethics committees, and funders generally, not just research funders, but funders generally. How do you involve your community in a way which meets the needs of that community? Far too often what we see or have seen is plans have been put together, they work really well because researchers or implementers really think they work, but sometimes they bypass communities. And the important thing is everything that we do must be for the communities. So involving communities in an appropriate way, using co-production as one way of doing it, is a very important thing to do. So we have been on a journey to try and make that happen and create a strategy which will be useful to not just us, but to any of our partners, any researchers, and other implementers. So this is a little bit about that journey. So I just wanted to start with, because many of you will be academics, start with, I'm trying to, there. Anybody know who this is? University Challenge kind of picture around? Anybody want to type in the comments who this is? The unfortunate thing is I won't be able to see if anybody types anything, but Kaylee might be able to. And I'll just share. This is Margaret Mead, a very famous anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, who was very active in the 50s and 60s in the US, talking about all things to do with society and communities, and was a was an important figure in the world of anthropology and still is considered quite important in the world of sociology and social sciences. And the reason I bring up Margaret Mead is once she was given a lecture and one of her students asked a question, and the question was, what is the very first sign of civilization? Quite a good question, you would think. And most people were thinking, okay, it might be art on cave walls, or it could be the creation of fish hooks or tools, or the kinds of things, clay pots and that kind of thing, that where humans go from being uncivilized towards civilization is something that will be found in tools or something like that. And the answer was none of those things. Margaret Mead answered, in fact, to say the very first sign of human civilization was the findings of a skeleton where the femur had been broken and repaired. So the femur is the longest bone in the human body, connecting the hip to the knee. And in the animal kingdom, if that bone was ever broken, you were almost guaranteed that you would never survive, because you would never be able to run away from others chasing you. You would never be able to go and fend for yourself. You'd never be able to go find food, water, shelter. So the fact that this was found suggested that this person, whoever it was badly injured. We don't know how they were injured, but somebody or a community of people got together and looked after them for at least, currently it takes at least 6 weeks to repair. Probably back then it would have taken much longer. And I can hear myself, I don't know what's happening there. So that was the very first sign of civilization, humans working together to support each other to make something better. And in this case, it was a health outcome, which was positive for this person who'd survived. So Margaret Mead is quite an important person who's contributed to this idea of like using social capital and using communities to advance health and healthcare. Next slide, please. And I'll just get that off you so I can just do this. I don't know what you've done there. So Margaret Mead is famously associated with this quote. So I'll just read it. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And I think that really epitomizes what co-production is about. And it's the kind of like framing of how we've considered it from the point of view of the strategy development that we have undertaken here in the Bradford Institute for Health Research. But there's a massive amount of conflation in the world of research and academia, and in health research in particular. There's lots of words which are bandied about, and sometimes people use the word co-production to mean other things, which are not necessarily co-production. So some of the words that you'll hear often are community engagement, community involvement, participation, and community development. They're all very distinct and different from each other, and it's important that we don't conflate these things. Co-production is very different from any of those things. I would, if I had a lot of time, be able to share exactly what all of these things mean, but I won't go into any great detail. But engagement could simply be, as the name suggests, putting a Facebook post out or sending a leaflet out or having a science festival and letting people come along. They don't necessarily, members of the public don't need to do a lot. They just are engaged by virtue of taking part in connecting to you and understanding what you're doing. They may not have to do anything after that. Involvement is a little bit higher than that. It entails some level of influence allowed to members of the public. So things like patient and public involvement groups that we organise, they'd fall under the banner of involvement. Participation is more about how do we, when we recruit people to our research studies, they are then considered participants. So they may not influence how you've done your research, or they may not influence anything that you've done, or you will do, but they are recruited to your study and would count towards that. And community development is one that appears quite a lot in the literature. And I often see the word community development and community development officers and posts like that. But strictly speaking, community development is a social process and is rooted in a vision of a more fair and just world. With community development, community members identify issues and determine joint actions with institutions to build healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. So in a way, it's almost in the world of civil rights movements. It's about finding injustices and finding ways to tackle those injustices. There is a glossary which may get posted by Divine, I think, in the chat, which separates all these different types of concepts, which we have attempted to do to help others not get these terms conflated. So co-production is different from any of those things. And it wasn't Margaret Mead who came up with the term, it was Elinor Ostrom, who was also based in the US, but not an anthropologist, a political scientist. And Elinor Ostrom was working with the Chicago police force to try and deal with creating a concept which would describe when you work with a community rather than for a community, and you both come up with a solution to whatever the problem might be, what should we call that? And so in the 70s, Elinor Ostrom came up with the term co-production. At the time, it was to sort of tackle mostly issues with policing and racism in Chicago, which interestingly is still an issue even now. But that's where the term was first used, at least in the literature. And so one of the big things that we find in the literature for the concepts that we've just talked about, you know, engagement, involvement, co-production, etc., it almost feels like there's a ladder, there's a linear ladder, which goes from, you know, at the very, let's just look at Wilcox's ladder as an example, where it's a linear ladder where at the very bottom you've got giving people information, which could be considered community engagement. And then you jump up one step and it's consultation, and that's things like surveys. And then deciding together could be PPIE groups, and then acting together in Wilcox's ladder at least, sits in the world of co-production. And then further up there, as I described, community development, supporting initiatives might fall like that. Now, the trouble is with these ladders, and you know, Wilcox's ladder is the easiest one I've picked on because it's got the fewest number of rungs, but all of these ladders make it seem like as if it's almost like you just go from one step to the next, and it's just a natural linear graduation. And the truth is it's not like that at all. It's something that we do discuss in the glossary, which I think Divine might have shared. And it reminds me a little bit of the same problem that we sometimes see in our school science classrooms, whereby they display the chart of the various planets, and it almost looks like they're all next to each other, and there's sometimes even casting shadows upon each other. But the truth is, if Earth was reduced to the size, the diameter of a pea, then we would need lots and lots of fold-out pages to make this work to scale, because Jupiter would have to be 300 meters away if it was to scale, and then Pluto would have to be 2.5 kilometers away and would be reduced to the size of a bacterium, so you wouldn't even be able to see it. And so the same problem that we have with this solar charts and the planetary charts, we have with the ladders, because they make it seem like it's just one after the next, and they're not. So we went about, as part of our work, to ask the question, okay, we're not very clear what co-production is, because it means lots of things to lots of people. Let's go and try and find a little bit out about what it actually is, what makes it work, who it works for, and how can we sort of find a way to help other researchers and colleagues in other sectors, such as, you know, public health and, you know, other basically implementation, various other outlets. How can we make it work so they understand what co-production is? But we didn't want to do it in a way where we look at all the negatives and just say, look, these are all the things that are not working. We started off with the idea of an appreciative inquiry, to think, okay, let's look at what works, who it works for, instead of the deficit approach of what's missing. And we did that after talking to quite a lot of community members about the sorts of things that we might find if we went on this journey of an appreciative inquiry. So the appreciative inquiry approach that we had used, I'll just let you look at that while I just take a swig of this water. Right. So the appreciative inquiry approach we had used is known to use the 5D approach. So at the very beginning, sorry, I should go one step back. We identified that in Bradford and in Tower Hamlets, there are lots of organisations who are getting together to try and deliver what they call co-production. Okay. And these are voluntary sector organisations, faith organisations, even statutory organisations who get together and they have a mission of like, okay, let's do something co-production wise. We identified altogether 96 people that we could talk to. This included interviews, focus groups and workshops. And we went about we went about using the appreciative inquiry 5D approach to speak to 96 people in a variety of formats, workshops, focus groups, and interviews. And we started off by thinking about, okay, help us understand, define, clarify, what do you mean by co-production? And so we kind of, you know, through the processes of workshops and focus groups and interviews, we defined what they mean by co-production. We then focused as part of those conversations to discover, okay, tell us what it is about co-production that you're doing that really makes it work well. And so this was, you know, part of the methodology to sort of think about what's positive. So that's discovery. And then naturally you would say this next step from that is, okay, so if it works this well, what would make it work even better? And also, if it's not working for certain groups or certain people or certain areas, what can we do? So this is the dreaming stage to make it work for others. And so we undertook that. And then naturally from that, we would design something. And that design was our co-production strategy, which we'll share by the end of this talk. And now we're in the phase of delivering it. And we're delivering it across a number of areas, including our Health Determinants Research Consortium, across Act Early, across Healthy Urban Places, across so many different projects that you can all imagine. But this is the journey that we had undertaken. And just to sort of give you a flavour of a workshop which was delivered with members of the public, the voluntary sector, policymakers. This one was held in Tower Hamlets, in fact, where we gathered their thoughts and ideas about, okay, how do you do co-production? Obviously, this is just for illustrative purposes. It wasn't the thing that resulted in the strategy, but it was quite a good way to capture people's thoughts and ideas about what makes co-production work. Likewise, we had this same method in the workshop in Bradford. Again, the same sorts of people were brought together, councillors and policymakers and, you know, the voluntary sector and lots of members of the public who are heavily engaged in projects to help us sort of like shape all the things that we've been talking to them about as part of the focus groups and the interviews, which was taken into this workshop to help us dream and design what the co-production strategy should look like. And so if I can sort of like very simply nail it to explain what co-production is, as far as all the work that we've done, as you know, through the appreciative inquiry approach, is through this Greek temple. You know, images are good ways of depicting ideas, aren't they? So if we think of co-production as an important thing to deliver, then it must be held by a number of core values. And we found through that work that we did through the appreciative inquiry that these are the very important core values of co-production. You probably know what all these things mean, but I don't think it harms if I just cover very, very briefly what they are. So for equality, the key thing you've got to think about is who is missing. So it's very easy for me to create a process for co-production, but get the wrong people there because they're the easiest to engage. It may be harder to get to people who may not ordinarily want to come to things that you're organising, but it's crucial. Otherwise, if you're designing, say, a project for homeless people and you're recruiting people who are not homeless, then you're missing a very important clientele there because the intervention is going to be affecting homeless people. So you've got to think about how do we get the voices of the missing And that really means that you've got to go out of your usual box and ask, okay, how do I get people here who are going to be affected, and how do I get them to affect what I'm going to be creating? So equality is about creating level playing fields, and it's an important thing that you can't just skip over. And it really does require a different amount of resource sometimes. I always say to people, there's nobody who is hard to reach. Everybody can be reached. Some people need a different amount of resource to be reached, and it's up to us to find a way to make that happen. So that's quite an important pillar, or a value we could call it. Agency is equally important, and I'll just give a very simple definition. To have agency means to have the ability to make decisions and take actions, and to feel in control of those actions and their consequences. It's quite an important thing that we don't just get people around a table or a workshop or any other exercise where you're going to be planning to do research together, or you're going to be planning to design an intervention together, and you just hope that they'll nod to everything that you say. It's important that they have the agency to be able to challenge what you're going to be planning, using their community vantage point to explain why certain things may not work or why other things may work better. Because just getting people recruited is not the final output. It's using them in a wise way, which is the important thing. And then reciprocity, a word which most people struggle to say, but said it so much it's now easy. We know why we're doing things. We could be doing it as part of, a plan for a doctoral research fellowship, or we could be doing it as part of a grant or an ethics application. Could be anything. We know what's in it for us. But have we always thought about what's in it for the community? And if we haven't, then we're probably not thinking along the lines of co-production. Now, here's a little bit of a challenge. Sometimes people go and do things, and they'll get out of it what they need, and then they'll vanish, and then the community will be left wondering, what happened there? If you ever do that, you're a terrible person, because the next person or the next group of people who need to go and try and work with the same community, you will have eroded a little bit of trust. And that's crucial, that you should never do that. Always feedback, always let people know, even if the outcome was not positive, always let people know what was done. And if something didn't happen for whatever reason, then explain, look, this is the outcome. Do not let the erosion of trust cause people to sort of abandon us completely. But reciprocity, it takes a number of forms. The most obvious form is, have you got enough money in the budget to pay people? What does your policy say about people's time and use of their time? Find ways to sort of get people to be creative and use their time. Also, things like improving people's CV. That's always a useful thing to share with people, because some people want to get a job and they want to sort of say that they've done certain things. And I've had lots of people who've ended up in co-production and then ended up as researchers. So the reciprocity is built in. And if you can communicate that at the beginning. Now, sometimes when I talk about this, people say, but we don't know what the outcome will be at the end. So should we say, look, this is what we'll get? Well, the world of research is full of uncertainties, isn't it? We don't really know what will happen at the end. But what we can say is, look, if we do this research, there is a possibility that things may change. Don't say they will change. There is a possibility things may change via policy change or via better funding, but we can't promise this. But have that conversation about reciprocity, because without reciprocity, co-production becomes a little bit problematic. I'll just let whoever that is in. Got that. So one of the things that so they're the values, and you could argue, well, okay, values are brilliant, but how do you do them? Because, you've given us lots of interesting things there, but what do you actually do? What are the practical things that we could do? Now, those 3 values, or those pillars, you could call them, are powered by these 9 principles. which are in the strategy, which we'll share at the end. And I'm not sure if I've got the link to that, but we'll find it and we'll pop it in. Yeah. So I'm not going to go through each and every one of these 9 principles, but I do want to at least talk through the first 3, if that's okay. And I'll do that by sharing slides about the first 3, and we could tap into the others if we needed to, but some of them look obvious. So things like, I'll do the slides in a second, but principle number 6, work flexibly. If you stick very rigidly to your idea of like, we're going to work between 9 to 5, then communities may not work with that, and often they'll find it a problem. And I've already talked about principle 9 about adequately resourcing things. You will never be able to do co-production by accidentally stumbling across the goodwill of people. You have to resource it appropriately, and sometimes that does take time and money, and it does sometimes involve, you know, having a staff member who's focused on that. But if I can just focus on the first 3 as slides. So sharing power. Sometimes when I talk to members of the public, they do find officialdom quite daunting, and they find that they have lots to share, but they find the system quite intimidating. So we've got in the strategy, we talk a little bit about, okay, how do we make it possible for members of the public who bring a different set of skills and ideas, and they may not agree with everything that we say, how do they come and join us in a way where they can contribute? So some simple pieces of advice is, if you're going to have a meeting, don't get all the professional staff who are all in pinstripe suits and ties to congregate in one corner and let the community members sit in another. Mix it up a little bit. Talk to people before a meeting. So if you're the facilitator or the organizer of a workshop or a meeting, talk to members of the public before a meeting, explain certain jargons if that's what you're going to have to encounter, and also have a briefing session afterwards to talk a little bit about what their contribution was and did they feel that they could contribute. Sharing power is quite an important principle as part of co-production, and is one of the first principles that we've got in those 9. The second principle out of those 9 is we've got to embrace a wide range of perspectives and skills. We all know what we know through the learning that we've undertaken or the experiences. Members of the public may have a completely different view because they come to it from a completely different angle. And you've got to find a way to embrace that perspective and also the skills that brings. A good example of this playing out recently, quite recently in Bradford, was during the pandemic. So we had quite a number of people across the district of Bradford who were very skeptical about vaccines, and we had lots of conversations about that. And the reasons why they were so skeptical is not because they were all taken over by conspiracy theories, but because there's a lot of conversations out there on WhatsApps and Facebooks which have frightened people, and they have sort of taken over a perspective and skill which is different to the scientific one. So we can't just have clinical setups where people will come if they're taken up by those messages. We then decided the best way would be to talk to members of the public who could then cascade those messages out there to their comrades, to their neighbourhoods, explaining why it's important to take the vaccine. So it was a case of, we didn't just dismiss what they had heard through WhatsApp or Facebook, but we tried to understand where it came from, and then found a way through the communities to sort of communicate in a way which would be fair and appropriate and responsive to the needs of that community. So it's important to embrace a wide range of perspectives and skills, not just to simply dismiss because they're different from our own. Number 3 is connected to that in some ways, and it's principle about respect and value lived experience and different forms of knowledge. So there are different models on what constitutes knowledge, but a good one that we found is there are 4 types of knowledge. Generally speaking, if we sort of split this in a quadrant, so we've got propositional knowledge, the kinds of things that we get through academic research, or the things that we learn when we're at university and college and school, organized in ideas and theories. Practical knowledge is about how to do things, whether it's taking blood pressure or whether it's how to change a car tire or how to fix a bike. It's practical. This is how you do something, and this is what the output will be. Experiential knowledge is what the community members bring, which is different to propositional and practical knowledge because it's gained by direct encounter. It's almost impossible to explain and put into words. It happens because you belong to a certain group or a certain neighborhood. You know things through culture and feeling and intuition, which may not be the same as you know through propositional knowledge or practical knowledge. And it's making use of that knowledge, which powers co-production. And connected to that is the idea of presentational knowledge. And that's strongly connected to experiential knowledge. In other words, how do you bring about the experiential knowledge? It may not simply be through meetings. It may not simply be through writing papers. How about using stories? How about using drawings? How about using artwork to sort of get people to reflect on what they feel will work or will not work, or what they feel they could contribute to something that you're setting up? So co-production asks us, for it to work, asks us to respect and value the lived experience and different forms of knowledge. So they're the three that I just picked. But if you reflect on the Greek temple that I showed earlier, it changes to this. So there's an evolution going on. So the same thing happens above. Co-production is still the roof of the whole thing, and there's three pillars which are holding it together, but they're powered by these 9 principles. So you can see sharing power and you know, respecting all forms of knowledge, and you know, and respecting different forms of knowledge and skills is all there. So this is what it looks like, and I'm sorry. So we have now got a strategy which have taken the culmination of all that work is this strategy, which is on the left. If you put that into your search engine, it'll come up as a PDF, and it explains how you can use co-production in research. But we've not narrowed it simply down to research, although the focus is research. It's for anything where members of the public need to be supported in helping us produce ideas and to sort of shape and co-design things. So that's the strategy. And then for those who are academically interested, we have got a peer-reviewed paper published about the journey that we had undertaken, what we found, and documenting across in that paper, you know, how we went about doing this. If anybody else wanted to follow the same approach, or if they just wanted to just have a read, that would be in there. We can send links to that. But the paper is open access, so you won't be restricted by paywalls or anything like that. So we have been on this journey, and we've implemented our co-production strategy across the Institute. And then we decided at a certain point, having got there, to let's really put some energy into this and make it happen across the district of Bradford and for our partners. So you'll know Rosie McKecken, Professor Rosie McKecken, and I, we led on going for a bid with Programme Development Grant to try and create a centre for co-production and peer research, which we're now finding a way to develop. We're on that journey. And just if I can sort of let you know a little bit about one project which we have got, which is operationalising that plan of co-production, is we've got a citizen science project which really delivers on everything that I've just talked about as part of the co-production strategy. So I'm just going to quickly and briefly just cover a little bit of that. These slides from this point onwards are courtesy of my colleague Nazish Mahmood. So Naz, if you're there, thank you. If you're not, still thank you. So we decided to okay, we know how to do co-production now based on everything that we've learned. Let's try and implement it and learn from it, and then evaluate it, and then create a centre for co-production and peer research. So that's the journey we're on. And so we picked 4 organisations in Bradford. The list is there, I won't need to read them, but they are focusing on 4 different communities of identity in 4 different geographical locations. And our focus was on the built and natural environment. And that's because that kept on creeping up in lots of other research projects. The built and natural environment is a stressor and is leading to health inequalities in lots of other papers and research. So we says, okay, if this is the case, let's find a way to work with 4 different communities across Bradford to try and see, okay, what is it about the built and natural environment for 4 different areas, 4 different community groups, and see what we find. So the 4 community groups all had a community coordinator picked, and then they recruited 5 peer researchers each. So in Girlington, you had this same model, and the same you had in East and West Bowling, the same in Homewood, and the same in Great Horton. And then each of those peer researchers selected 10 participants. So these are members of the public who live in the area. We trained the community coordinator and the peer researchers on how to use research systems, but we drew on their experiences, lived experience, and their skills and knowledge in the way that I described experiential knowledge. So this was a solid partnership between us and the community coordinator, who's employed by the voluntary sector organisation, and the 5 peer researchers that they had recruited from their neighbourhoods. And we used a tool, an online tool, where they could ask members of the public to go and tell us a little bit about their built and natural environment, using their own words, taking photographs about the issues that they identify as important to them. And we're working with all the 4 community organisations in the 4 neighbourhoods to help us understand and to help them understand, how do we collect this information, how do we analyse it to make it important to councillors, to teachers, to police, to anybody who needs to see it. So we're currently in so that this is just a flavour of the kind of thing that would appear on the mobile phone when they were collecting data with participants. And so as part of that, it involved us doing all sorts of interesting training exercises, workshops, talking about things like safeguarding, talking about things like how do you securely save data and transfer it, how do you, in a competent and confidential manner, take consent, all the kinds of things that you would expect from a research project, but purely working as in partnership with communities. So that's the journey that we've been on, and we've got a Centre for Co-production and Peer Research. Final words from me, if that's okay. So we're going to evaluate all of that work with the 4 organisations, and the evaluation will tell us who did it work for, this approach, who did it not work for, why did it not work for, who did it not work for, and what could we learn from this to make it better, so when we actually launch our Centre for Co-production and Peer Research, how do we make it work for everybody? And so that's the journey that we have been on. We've got a lot more of this journey to complete to have this centre, and I'll stop there. I did put Twitter, but I don't really use Twitter anymore, really, other than just to argue with people on Elon Musk stuff. So that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shahid. I think that's just a great reminder, isn't it, to all of us as researchers, the importance of considering co-production in everything we do. And as Shahid said, it's something that is built in now, but is it something that we always truly think about, or do we just see it as something else that we need to do to get into a grant? So I think that's a really, really wonderful overview and a lot of food for thought to get us all thinking about what we should really be doing to make the best use of our communities in our research. So I'm just going to go to the chat and see what questions we've had come in. Apologies, we couldn't look at these throughout. Just lots of no's saying they couldn't see it.
All right. Okay.
Thank you, Divine, for sharing the glossary that Shahid mentioned. Labina, so can we come to you first of all, if you'd like to ask your question to Shahid that you popped in the chat.
Yeah, hiya. I've just put now in the chat that hi Shahid, that was really good. I'm doing a lot of work around co-production on the project that I'm working with at the moment. So I was just thinking of, how when we're setting out and we're doing our work and we're kind of like planning and designing and scoping where we're going to focus with our, with our project and who and where we're going to go to first. It's really easy to, I feel sometimes, to kind of like just to get things going, and I think that's where we kind of like miss out the people that we feel are later underrepresented in the research. So because you mentioned the appreciative inquiry, you talked about how you don't want to look at what's not working, you don't want to look at what's missing. Initially, you want to look at what is working, what are the good things. So then I was thinking, if that's what we're doing at the outset, if we're looking at the positives at the outset, at what point isn't that kind of like setting the stage for missing or excluding groups right from the get-go? But later on, you explained how you would bring in the underrepresented groups, so it made sense in the end. Like I got the last piece to my jigsaw. So
Yeah,
you kind of answered my question.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lavina. It's a good point. If we only look at what's good, then we'll miss out what is missing, and that's quite an important thing to do. What you'll find is through natural osmosis in this process, you'll see that people will say, well, actually, this is good, but this would make it even better, and that's the dream bit. And so what you're doing is you're looking for ways to you're almost asking members of the public or whoever you're doing the appreciative inquiry with to innovatively come up with ideas that would make things better. And by way of doing that, they'll reflect on what was missing and how to make it inclusive. But also, I think it's quite an important thing to ensure to have a very honest discussion about, who is missing, because it's very easy to settle for, okay, we've got 8 people, they're very engaged, they come along. I don't like to use the term usual suspects, but I guess you know what I mean if I do. And you've got to just ask yourself, okay, is this representative? And if not, then what can I be doing to sort of get more people interested and make my system such where people who are new to the idea of like helping us with research don't feel intimidated, like the caricature which I showed at the beginning, where there's a boxing glove and a very large bulky man making somebody else look very scared. It's kind of like that can really be it for some people, and they'll just think this is not for me. We've got to be very innovative and find ways to stop that from happening. Yeah. Somebody else says, can you post a link to the strategy?
Yeah, so Divine, please could you, as an action after this, could you make sure all delegates are sent the link to the strategy and also the slides to your last 4 also, please? The recording will be posted on the ARC website as well. So if any colleagues have missed out, this will be available afterwards. But yeah, we'll make sure you all get sent the resources afterwards. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
And then we have a question from Anne. I don't know, Anne, if you're still on the call and we'd like to ask, are the council involved in your locality's work?
Hi, Shahid. It's Anne Heaven. I'm in an office near you. But
Hi, Anne.
I haven't got a camera because it's on the blink. So I was just
wondering.
Right,
I know what you look like. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. So I was just wondering if the council were on board with your strategy and whether they had been partners in doing your locality work, because obviously we're looking at built and natural environment. They have a huge role to play in how that is addressed.
Yeah. So yeah, the answer is yes to that. So when we delivered this strategy, both the Tower Hamlets Council and Bradford Council had signed up for it as part of their Health Determinants Research Consortium bid, which they were both successful, so pleased to say. And our council has now appointed, or not just now, but about 6-7 months ago, appointed a co-production lead for the research work as well. Shabana Din is her name. So yeah, they have signed up to it, and so have quite a number of other partners, including the ICBs.
So I would say that's an important element when it's not only about trying to perhaps seek out those who are seldom heard, but also making sure that you can get those stakeholders on board who are actually able to address some of the things that will come up, because they won't necessarily all be for things that can be taken forward with health research, I guess. So I think that gives the communities more confidence in where their efforts are going and who's going to listen to them, who's got an ear for them, because it would be awful to go into a community. I mean, years and years ago, I did stuff around action zones and the social regeneration money that came out of Europe. And if those partners who are in a position to take action on board, it all kind of falls down at the end, and that's again where you can lose the trust that you were talking about building. So that's quite a big chunk of work to do as well. Sometimes, I mean, it's easier now that people are more on board with it, but it's still a bit of a slog getting those externals involved, I guess, I would say, personally.
Yes, a good point. But yes, it's good that they're on board, and that sort of warms my heart that both Tower Hamlets and Bradford have got this. So yeah, that's good.
I have to bob off now, so thanks for the talk.
No problem.
Thank you, Anne. And we have a question from Sarah Hadfield. Would you like to jump in and ask a question?
Yes, sorry, I'm just trying to unmute myself. Hello, it's Sarah Hadfield. I'm from Leicestershire County Council. I'm just wondering about what you were saying about what we can offer sort of peer researchers, our citizens' assembly, our public involvement, and I'm wondering if there's any official qualifications in research training that can be offered, because it's great. You're obviously expert. We can offer our own expertise in terms of teaching social research or methods, but it doesn't, when they say leave us, it might not necessarily be an official qualification. So I was wondering if you're aware of something that gave them that accreditation, or that would be an offer.
Yeah. Now, I can't answer this, but I'm with a slight degree of trepidation because I don't have all my paperwork in front of me.
Yeah.
But the Young Foundation, they deliver some training, which, from what I understand, is accredited and recognised. And so do the co-production collective, which is part of the UCL, University College London. But we are planning, so this is the next phase for us to think a little bit about, because you know, those courses are not very cheap. I don't know how much they cost, but they're not very, you know, it does cost something. We are planning to think a little bit about how do we create something which is an offer which would be universal, in the sense that if somebody took part in peer research training or citizen science training, then if they did it for one thing, would they be able to sort of like also apply it in other things? So that's the conversation that we're having, which is part of our Centre for Co-production and Peer Research plans. But at the moment, we don't have anything that we're delivering ourselves, which is accredited. It's really useful what we do deliver to people because they tell us, and we are evaluating our work through, you know, the project which I shared earlier about the 4 areas, and people say positive things. There's obviously things that we do need to improve on, but we don't have an offer at the moment yet, Sarah. So I invoke you to check with Co-production Collective or the Young Foundation to see if they've got anything at the minute.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So we've got just a few minutes left. Is there anybody else that would like to ask anything of Shahid? No? Quiet room. I guess I have one question just to round up. So you were saying at the beginning, kind of, it was something that was made relevant in the 70s, but it's kind of become progressively more on people's radar, and now it's in agendas and in research calls. Do you feel that that has impacted the outputs more? Do you feel like the research is more community driven than it was? Are you optimistic for the future? Do you feel like we're going in the right direction?
I'll give you a proxy measure. So the number of papers that are published now which talk about patient public involvement in co-production have increased tenfold in the last 10 years.
Great.
So it's quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I get loads of papers which say, will you review this? And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. And it's happening much more frequently. The number of colleagues who are contacting me to say, can you help us think this through, has just like become exponentially increased. So we are in a world now where this is no longer, like I say, just a cherry on top. It's like the yeast,
the
which
core
makes
of
it
it, not
rise.
just a tick box like I feel it maybe used to be.
Yeah, and it's a case of to make it work at that level, we're going to have to work a lot more with our communities using innovative ways because how many people are out there who are interested, as our funders are,
Yeah.
and as our ethics committees are, and as our reviewers are. So we've got to sort of up our game to get more people interested. So that's the mission, I guess.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A thank you in the chat from Jenny. One last call for any other questions. No, great. We can all have a couple of minutes left. to
I'm
spare
just
before we-
typing. I won't be a second.
Oh, sorry, we'll
Oh,
wait for you, Joe. Speak,
oh,
speak. You don't have to type.
just
Go ahead,
tell
just
us.
speak. Yeah.
The only thing I was going to say that I am studying at the uni, but I also work for the Alzheimer's Society as an involvement lead, which is about enabling people to take part in various projects, both internally and externally. I just thought I'd mention it because we have a database of people who are interested in getting involved with various pieces of work, all affected by dementia. So they could be living with a diagnosis, could be a carer, could be a family or friend. So I just thought it might be worth just maybe emailing you around that, because there's a potential that students might be able to match up with somebody on our database, because we do a lot around involvement and co-production, co-creation. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention it.
What's the name of the person we just spoke?
Joe.
Oh, Joe. Right.
Herrera.
All right, that's a really good call, Joe, because we are in our small team, which is growing. We're thinking about how do we score, how do we save the details of people to show what interests they've got, what training they've had, and what kinds of things that they'd like to be involved in. And as part of that, working with our local authority, the HDRC, we're going to create something which would make it easy for other researchers to sort of tap into that. On it. So do make contact, because that sounds really relevant. So I'm glad that's come out of it as a result of this.
Yeah. I mean, we do have that database, so people sign up to it, so they can sign up for involvement opportunities across the society, but wider as well. We're working with the UCL and other universities, and the Time for Dementia programme, which I don't know if you've heard of, but they're matched up. Basically, they match up undergraduate students with people living with dementia. Sorry, my dog's just barking, but I'll drop you an email.
That's not a problem. Thank you.
The dog wants to see you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Nabina, would you like to jump in for the last minute?
Yeah, if you've got time, sorry. So the NIHR have just recently mentioned that when we're going to be applying for funding, we need to factor in money for our research to be inclusive, and we need to give obviously explain what we're going to be using that money for. So if we were going to have apply the co-production methodology in our research, and we say we're going to do co-production from an EDI perspective, in co-production, I guess there's going to be a need for funds to be used for language and interpreting, but what else could you ask for the money to be for? What do you think the NIHR will need to see if they wanted to fund money from an EDI angle for a study or research using co-production?
Yeah, so I'd say co-production is not necessarily it's not the same as EDI, but EDI is crucial to it. And so the work that we would do as part of co-production, we'd have to think about, okay, there's 9 characteristics as part of equality, race, ethnicity, gender, sex, marital status, etc., etc. Have we done an equality impact assessment to make sure that we have fairly and appropriately included all the different characteristics? Diversity, I suppose, as part of that, you've got to, one of the things that NIHR I've seen is that they're looking for how do you improve the diversity of staff. So there's a little bit of a mirroring of, like, if certain people belong to certain, let's say, identities, are they included in the research? So diversity is about having different viewpoints and different identities. And inclusion, like, as part of co-production, inclusion is the key factor. How do you include people using innovative and interesting and important and appropriate ways to influence your research. So you could, they are hand in glove, but they're not exactly the same thing, EDI and co-production, but they do sit very comfortably together. It's just, you've got to factor that into you when you're writing it up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lavina. And I think we're going to have to come to a close there with just 1 minute over. So a big thank you to Shahid again for your time and for sharing your wealth of knowledge. Shahid is our expert and he's very in demand for all his knowledge, as you can tell from that talk. So thank you very much for your time today. And thank you all for you on the call, for your contributions and for listening. And we will see you at the next Lunch and Learn. Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody, bye.
Bye.